You're listening to the Ryangle podcast, starring Ryan Hoger and Ryan Eastwood, and sometimes other people named Ryan. And now, here are some Ryans.
In the last week of fatigue too, I'm sure it's not going to help with that. Today I'm quite awake, but yeah, the last week it's been great actually. Let me give my I don't know about you, but for me the best way to get my brain to work is to be like, I require this task, and then not focus on it at all for a couple minutes, and then be like, all right, brain, what have you produced? And it's like this, and this. Oh yeah, okay. Definitely my thinking is a background process.
Give me a concrete example of that mental trick.
Like right now we're like, okay, I need to put myself back in the mindset that it was when I was coming up with this imagined self versus real self thing. And instead of sitting there and trying to think about it, I'm just gonna tell a different story. And by the time I'm finished with that story, I should have a pretty good of what I was planning on thinking about.
Yeah, that was I feel like we don't tap into and trust those powers enough. Like the I guess what you would just call the process is the prefrontal cortex. So your linear thinking, mostly linguistic brain is very suspicious of the subconscious mind, I think. But if you I never read that book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, but I believe some of it was on this. And I need to read that book. But basically, it feels like when you really pay attention to what's happening in your brain, the super processing is happening on a subconscious level, like the really complex shit. Like if you just get down to what it takes to walk and scramble across a pile of rubble, there's so much math there. You could never think linearly about it. And there are also things that happen extremely quickly. Like we can't help it. We make snap judgments of people and situations to say, is this safe? Is this not safe? And sometimes that's wrong, but a lot of times it's quite correct. And we have and then there's that principle of just sleep on it,
Yeah.
Just sleeping on a thing. I feel like we don't take advantage of that enough. You literally can sort of consciously give your brain a background task. And even if you can't feel it happening, the background task is going on that requires creative or strategic thinking or something like this. Something you don't need to think linearly about. Like what we think of as thinking when we say I'm thinking about something, that very linear, deliberative, definitely has its place in a lot of situations, but we should rely on the other parts of our brain maybe more. And when you think about it, it's very it feels extremely sophisticated, this linear thinking that we're doing with our language, but it's really a pretty clunky, slow, it feels like the people that can do really, really complex math operations extremely quickly. And there are these people that are just savants where you can say, what is the cube root of 724? And they'll tell you in a second. They're not thinking linearly. They'll tell you it's happening on a subconscious process. I see shapes and colors and then the number appears to me, sort of a thing. Right.
Yeah.
But if you and I are doing arithmetic to get change, we're doing this very clunky process. So that's interesting that you say that you have sort of recognized that ability of your subconscious mind and harnessed it.
And, even that whole set of sentences you had right there is that probably came to you as kind of this big all at once gestalt, but in order to translate it into something audio, you gotta talk for a minute and a half.
Yeah.
You got to feed it all through. Yeah. This one little chain, a very linear process for basically something that came all at once.
Yeah, man. And I have the spookiest sometimes, just I get senses of this is right and this is not right about lots of things. Right. The other day I was I should make this purchase. And I was if I make this purchase, I should also purchase this thing. And something just didn't feel right about it. And then I was opened up this other thing in my house and I was oh, I didn't even realize I had this thing. But somewhere in my brain, it knew that I already had the thing. I didn't need to purchase another one. And it just showed up as a sort of vague gut feeling that I decided to go with. It's probably not spooky magic. It's probably just, it feels spooky because you're like, I didn't know, but like somewhere inside you knew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it can be spooky. It can be like, I should wait on this. And then like the correct opportunity will come a little bit later down the line. And you're like,
later,
oh yeah, correct. Okay. I was supposed to be patient and wait for this thing. Now, if you don't believe in spooky psychic powers, I don't know how you explain those sorts of feelings other than I guess you just throw it all in the coincidence bucket. But how do you think about those sorts of things?
Yeah, that goes into, actually, I think we've come around to the topic there too. Hold on, let me shift my blinds again and think about that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back on the Ryan Angle podcast here, in which two gentlemen named Ryan talk about things that are of interest to anybody else named Ryan.
We're inscribing binary digits on magnetic storage with our thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
It is astonishing. There, I just try to do more of that. Everybody, be astonished by all things at all times. Be like a newborn kitten that has been dropped in the streets of Tokyo at all times during your life. Astonished and frightened by all things.
Astonished and frightened, yes, by the cacophony of noises and lights that surround you.
Yeah. Everything is amazing. You understand none of it and you control nothing. And you're at the mercy of forces which are unseen and unpredictable by you.
Which
Good morning.
Really brings us to our topic of the
day. And what is our topic, Ryan?
Our topic of the day, Ryan, is the difference between the real and imagined self, in the most pretentious way that I can put it. In slightly less pretentious wording, it would be the person who you think of yourself as when you're going about your day versus the sort of person that you actually are as defined by your actions, and how those things interact and contradict each other more or less depending on your particular inclinations.
Okay. Yes, you sort of organically came about this topic when we were chatting, and then it jived with a book I had read by, I should have gotten the author ready, but it's called Strangers to Ourselves, and it is about the sort of how our unconscious plays a much, much larger role than we think. And then our ability to explain our actions away in a way that makes sense to us without really understanding what the motivations are. So that's where I'm coming at it from. It's kind of thinking about that subject through that book and as an observer of my own brain. But yeah, what is the thing that prompted you to start thinking about this idea of the sort of the, you could call it the authentic versus the egoic self, or the just like the genuine versus the conceptual self, something along those lines, and like the conflicts and problems that brings into your life?
So the specific sort of disconnect that got me thinking about it is, okay, so I, as any listener of this podcast may or may not be aware, I am a sailor and I work a schedule that has me anywhere from a month to 2 months or more on and working. And then I get a more or less equal time off and at home. And in my younger days, I used to be self-employed. And fair disclosure, I was never very good at it, but I did it. And I developed a sense of my motivations as being your sort of self-employed go-getter entrepreneur. Like that's why I'm going to say I think I do a pretty good job at my job when I'm jobbing. and part of me will ascribe this sense of I'm motivated to because I was self-employed. But then I'm thinking about it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, actually, I have a really hard time being self-employed. I'm not actually particularly self-motivated. Like the whole grind of doing the thing you need to do of not just doing the thing that you need to do every day, I have no problem with. I'm fairly good at it. Keeping myself on a task that needs to be done to the exclusion of other things that I could be doing, like reading a book instead, I have a very difficult time with. But nonetheless, I still think of myself as being driven by this, the millionaire grind set, whatever activity. That's not how I'm actually motivated. And while I'm off, I tend to kind of sit around and read a lot. But I still think of myself I think of like stuff like I'm thinking of what I should be doing or what I like trying to decide what I want to be doing, quote unquote. And I'm going, well, I want to be doing something, meaningful and productive or self-improving with my time, right? That's what I want to be doing, right? Because I have the multi-billionaire grind set, right? Like I could totally out motivate Jeff Bezos, whatever, because I have this millionaire grind set, but I don't like. And the way that I know that I don't is because given the choice, which I have every moment that I'm not at work being directed to do, given the choice between, learning to program or whatever, or eating popcorn, drinking beer, and reading on the couch, well, I'm going to choose eating popcorn, drinking beer, and reading on the couch.
And
Like
popcorn's real
90% of the, yeah, it's delicious. And programming is boring. I hate it. So, but this is what's gotten me real. This is, I guess, what got me really practically considering the differences. That's actually one that comes up regularly is like, I should learn how to program because reasons, I'm sure you can think of the reasons like, oh, because it's anybody can do it. It's low cost. It's high return. I do think it's interesting. Like I think computer function and the way that a processor turns readable like language commands into recognizable processes is fascinating. But the actual process of writing code, it's just interminable. Like every time, like I feel like I even understand is kind of getting into a very specific tangent, but I feel like I even understand the logic, but the process of writing it is like, no, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes doing that. And then I'm going to take a nap.
So I've never done anything like terribly complicated there. But isn't there some satisfaction in kind of like you're building a little machine to do something in a way, and then once the machine does the thing you want, the machine being like the lines of code, once it does what you want it to do and it pops out, is that not satisfying enough to take you through the process of actually writing?
I'm sure it would be if I could focus on it long enough to finish a project. But like I said, so boring. Like,
yeah,
just interminable.
Some things, the process of getting to mastery has its own inherent rewards, and then other things like I ski because I've been skiing since I was a little kid, and I tried snowboarding, and snowboarding looks very, very fun to be good at, but not being good at it is very not fun and expensive.
But it's painful.
Yeah, it is not like figure skating also being great at it might be fun. Not being great at it is just falling on ice repeatedly. So yeah. Now I'm immediately struck by something that I think you could be thinking hearing that, which is like, let's say you have a person that they go, well, what I'd really like to be is successful at this and that. But if I observe my behaviors, all I do all day is sit around and play video games. So that's just what I should do, is all day sit around and play video games. Right. And I want to say we're not saying like just observe your own habits and then perpetuate those and accommodate those things as they are. Because like sometimes you do need to imagine a better or a different self. And to my mind, the difference is it has to come from like an authentic desire within yourself and not just reasons, right? So the reasonable thing when you went to boat school was to become like an engineer because that's just so much more transferable. But I just aesthetically didn't like it. And like that's all I need, right? Like I'm interested in aspects of it, but I just did not want to spend my day-to-day time in an engine room tinkering with parts and dealing with grease and stuff like that. I wanted to be up on deck. So what how do you, yeah, how do you think of it that way? Or has it been a process for you of like discovering what your authentic desires are, like just giving yourself some more slack? How do you think about that? Are you giving anything up that you like wish like deep down in your soul that you were doing with your time?
That is a good question. Those are good questions, and I feel like it's part of what the topic is there to tease out. I'm going to say that in contrast, there are other things that I have worked on to mastery. Like I started like I juggle and spin poi, the various sort of circus arts, and those are definitely things that I started out not being able to do some, 20 years, 18, 20 years ago. And I remember the process of working from not being able to do it to being able to do it to a certain level of mastery. I mean, juggling, three ball juggling is probably a really good example because everybody's seen it. You start out and you attempt to juggle and you fail because you can't juggle. um, and then you start, but really you start to learn to juggle. Everybody, like what people tend to do is they take two. I'm just going to do a quick juggling tutorial because I feel like it'll work into the topic. People try to do is they take two balls and they try to do the thing, right? They try to like toss them into each other. That's not actually how you learn juggling. The way you learn juggling is you take one ball and you get really good at tossing that one ball from hand to hand. Because if you can't toss one ball from hand to hand reliably and accurately 100 times in a row, there's no way you're going to be able to do it with two, let alone three. So you start out just by getting good at doing one ball back and forth. See that endless repetition of throwing one ball back and forth from hand to hand, super down with. I was into it partly because I could tangibly see what the rewards are, like being able to three ball juggle, and partly because it's probably just because it's physical. I have it right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And this was very satisfying. Three ball juggling I'm medium good at, but I can do a couple complicated tricks. I can definitely take you through the steps of getting from not being able to juggle to being able to juggle to having a intermediate level of mastery. Like there's some other props that I would say I have a high level of mastery in. Three ball juggling isn't one of them, but it's a good example because I don't have to explain what it is. So yeah, and that had no problem. Like, and why did I spend the time taking it from not being able to juggle to yes being able to juggle? Well, because it was fun and it was satisfying and had an immediate tactile feedback that I really enjoyed. Um, but that
Similar to playing an instrument, like I feel like playing an instrument has immediate tactile feedback because you can go very quickly from I don't know what this thing is to I made a noise and it doesn't sound awful, and then you can like build on that sort of feedback, immediate feedback.
Instant feedback. Yeah. And but does that feed into that layer of my brain that's thinking of myself as someone who's going to start a successful business? No. And none of my motivations and things that have actually worked for me have ever dovetailed with imagining myself as an entrepreneurial and organizational genius. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's not there. Like I can't do those things. Or rather, I probably could, but I don't do those things, and I certainly don't do them in my off time.
Yeah, is it one of those? I think germane to this story is what you said about your parents being, they're successfully self-employed people, and I think everybody has, there's the classic story of like my dad was a dentist, so then I went to school and I became a dentist. You get programmed with like a sense of what is success and what is like a normal level of economic success to achieve when you're very young. I think we all sort of like embrace that comfort level and try to get to it. So that I think you eventually became self-aware that part of what was pushing you towards an entrepreneurial idea of yourself was the fact that you'd seen your parents be happy and successful doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And the reason I'm I pay attention to it at all, like if it wasn't bothering me, then why would I care, right? It's just this quirk that I think of myself as it for me personally. It could just be this quirk that I think of myself as this potential, like this currently successful like business type, when the reality is that I like to juggle um and not to do accounting. um but
There are people who
along
like
with
to do accounting. Doesn't that blow your fucking mind?
no, I could imagine myself as a person who likes to do accounting.
Okay.
I could see it,
I
like
can't
just
I can't even get
all of
there.
it, all of it adding up and just being like, yeah, that came in. Like, oh yeah, I'm not saying the wife's chiming in. I'm not saying I'm that kind of person. I'm saying I could imagine what it would be like to be that kind
You
of
can
person.
imagine what would be satisfying about it. You can't imagine being, I saved this motherfucker so many taxes. Oh my god, so
Yeah. Oh no.
satisfying.
Yeah. And Trisha's right. I hate it, but
Okay.
I don't. Anyway,
Yeah.
um, what the issue is that I end up with this sense of guilt that I'm like, oh, I don't like. I'm
Aha.
supposed to like to do accounting, and then I start thinking less of myself because I'm not spending my time doing taxes, for example,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
and instead I'm reading a book that I enjoy or playing with swords because I enjoy that. Like, and
That
that's where the
sense of
disconnect comes in, is where you're doing it wrong right now. Like I'm not living my best life right now because I'm not learning how to program in C.
that sense of guilt is really interesting. Let me kind of slip into therapist role and drill down on that. Um, what does the sense of guilt feel like in your body?
Oh, it's behind the sternum and
Mm-hmm.
a little bit nauseous.
And a little bit nauseous. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of when I feel that. Like it feels like I don't feel like I had a lot of expectations put on me as a kid, so I don't get
And up in the
as
sinuses too. Like I'm
as
thinking
much
into
of
it.
that.
Yeah, up in the sinuses too. Like there's a little, not labored breathing, but the breathing gets a little hot.
Okay. And it's just this unpleasant sensation that you would like to make go away by
Yeah.
living up to those expectations. That is probably I'm gonna fall back into my like evolutionary psychology mode. Like there is a value in being a social species of setting sort of a base level of expectations for achievement and success and making people feel negative feelings if they don't meet that, right? Like
Yeah.
you should feel that. So I don't I do you think that feeling is always bad in the sense that it's something to overcome and not necessarily like listen to, or do you think there's times in which you felt that feeling and it has served you in some way?
No, I definitely hear where you're coming from on the evolutionary standpoint. And no, I don't think it's something that should be done away with, because no, like I have the same, I think it's the same feeling I have when I'm obsessively checking to make sure that I set my alarm properly for something important. It's a very similar sort of feeling,
Hmm.
which I overdo, I think, because I generally set good alarms, but I still have to obsessively check them for things that I, have to do. Um, and sometimes I'll lose sleep over it, which is very counterproductive. But if I didn't have the urge at all, like and then the thing that's counter to it is that in terms of like success and providing for the family, etc., I actually am quite successful. It's just that those I'm not successful in the ways that my brain is telling me sometimes that I should be. And certainly, yeah, you get what I mean there?
Yeah, so it's you're looking around your life and you're like, okay, what are the things that are important to me? I've got a wife and two children. I'm taking care of them. I'm doing something for a living that I enjoy a good amount of the time and I feel good about. So like all of your core values are being met ostensibly, and yet there is still a bit of a guilty feeling because the idea that you formed of yourself, when do you think you formed this idea of yourself as a entrepreneurial person? When did you first like conceptualize yourself as that kind of person or someone who would do that? How far back does that go?
Well, I did started doing it as early as like high school. When I was like 16, I actually came up with still, I think, the best web design name there's ever been and registered hyperblink.com. Hyperblink. You write that? You like that?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And in the late 90s, especially, that was some good, that was gold. Uh so and when I was like
When
16,
domain names were still available.
yeah, exactly. And when I was like 16, instead of, getting a job at, a McDonald's or whatever was down the street, I said, well, I can make like $20 an hour designing web pages for people. So why would I get a job? So
Yeah.
I didn't. I did that instead. And I did a few web pages and I made some pocket money. And, that was how I did that. So from early on, I was seeing the value in self-employment. And I continued to do that sort of not working for other people thing really until, yeah, I was pretty deep actually, because I went to boat school and out about when I was 31. And really up to then I had worked jobs for other people, but generally it was always interspersed with being self-employed. Like when I was a house painter and when I was a massage therapist, I didn't take a job from somebody else. I tried to run my own practice. It didn't work very well, but I did try to do it. And it really wasn't until after I graduated boat school that I took jobs which provided both financial success and emotional success, to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely better than trying to do it myself.
Yeah. Are you feeling unfulfilled in any way by not pursuing those things? Is there something that you wish you were getting that you're not
As far as
getting?
response from the outside, no, I don't think there is.
Okay. Maybe that's a key component to it.
That could be a key component because I am having my needs met both individually and like emotionally and financially. So there is a good feedback loop.
Yeah. So I
But
think
then I'll just be relaxing, but my mind will be like, why are you relaxing? You should be improving yourself.
I'm going to be an advocate here for the sort of middle way, because the more I'm thinking about this now, the more I think the idea of a conceptual self, which you sort of behave in a way to you strive to conform to, does have a lot of utility in certain aspects. So like the Marine Corps, which I was part of, like is massive on this. Like the Marines get incredible amounts of performance out of people who, almost all of which, present company included, when they join, are just average Joes, right? And the reason you do that extra set of push-ups, the reason you stay up later, the reason you deal with pain longer than you normally would, is largely that conceptual of idea of that they take pains to build. And boot camp is almost entirely that. Like there's training and stuff like that, but you don't learn a lot of the actual skills of like warfare or combat at all in boot camp, which I think is a big misconception people have. It's about reshaping the identity of the individual. Now you can think of it like as sick and Orwellian if you want, which like that's a valid perspective. But another way to look at it is like any conceptual idea that you have of yourself. And I had to be stripped of it because at the time that I joined the Marines, I had like I had a suit in a corner office, and I was an adult, and I had my own uh my own place to live, and I had a certain amount of adult dignity, and then they just take all of it. They take every last bit of that away from you. Um and I see that like there's a way to look at that as evil, but there's also a way to look at that as a bit of a spiritual pursuit, like the warrior thing, right? Because you're saying you're taking on a new context. You're taking on an entirely new idea of who you are. And right now, you don't count for anything in this new context. And if you want to, gain status in this new hierarchy, if you want to live up to this conceptual idea of what a Marine is, if you want to be these things, well, then you need to do XYZ, and you need to do it hard. And it's going to take a really long time. And so you can get an incredible amount of performance out of people with that. I imagine, I don't know a lot about the internal workings of like a highly esteemed company like Apple, but I imagine there's a lot of that still going on. Like, this is fucking Apple. This is a big, and so people will push themselves harder to be the kind of person that is an organization. You can do that positively. You can do that in families. Like, hey, we're hogers. We don't behave that way towards each other, or we help each other out because and it's just as made up as anything fucking else, right? But it's I view it as like a technology, and where it becomes pathological is when you're inflexible with it. So you can have no concept of yourself and you can just forgo that technology. I think you'd have to be, it's so deeply ingrained in us as humans that you'd have to be a fucking like monk and make that your sole pursuit. And then like, ta-da, you have a new identity, which is the egoless person and that you can strive for. You're just playing another game, or you can be very flexible about it. And, going back to the military thing, I don't look really favorably on people that have been out of the military and that's still like their whole fucking shtick. They got the stickers on their car, they got the whole thing. Like, I don't hate you, like, good for you, right? But to me, it just says like, you have another chance to be another thing. Go be a different thing, and so for yourself, like, when it comes to feeling guilty that you're not living up to another idea of your conceptual self, I think that's where it's become pathological, because it's an idea that would serve you in certain contexts, but it just doesn't serve you in your current context. Like, you'd be much better off not feeling that guilt and dropping it and using your time in ways that you value while you're home and continuing to pursue the sailor thing. So that's, when I come down to it, I go, just fine, have a conceptual idea of yourself, like, I am the greatest whatever mother gymnast thing, and use that to push yourself. But it shouldn't come without deliberation and thought. A lot of those things, those concepts of who you are and what you should be, just come from the outside world, and a lot of times it's either your parents and it's well-meaning, or a lot of times just from the culture at large, and it's usually in a way to manipulate you to become useful to another person or corporation or entity. But if you can recognize it, and if you can be flexible and just see it as like a costume that you're putting on, or like a tool that you're employing, I think it could be good. You just need to drop those self-concepts that aren't serving you at the time.
Yeah, and what you're saying there is definitely thrown me down a couple different conceptualizations of it. Like, for I think the issue that I have with it, like, if I thought of myself as this go-getter, whatever, and was using it to like study coding or whatever and making progress, and even just making progress at, let's just use the learning to program example. Even just, which is still like a vague interest, but if I was using it, even disliking the process of learning to program, but still putting the time into it because the self-reflection or whatever demanded it, that would be one thing that I would basically categorize as positive. That doesn't happen though. What actually happens is I don't actually change my behavior. I just feel conflicted about it, which just destroys enjoyment. And I guess part of that's sort of the metaphysical aspect of it for me, where maybe it even gets into a bit of fate, where it's like these are the things that you are going to do during your lifetime, and you can feel however it is you want to feel about them, but you're going to fulfill X, Y, and Z function. I think,
Yeah.
and then that kind of goes a different direction. But then I was also thinking about like during the time that I was hitchhiking in Australia, for example, and fire dancing all the time and going to various music festivals and whatnot. I had a fully different self conceptualization there. I thought of myself as sort of this otherworldly creature on the fringes of society, which I was. And actually, feral was the word that I would think of to describe myself, was a feral human being, once domesticated and is no longer domesticated, which itself was probably way off base and didn't actually describe what I was doing very well. Again, showing that split between your conceptualization of yourself and what you're actually doing, because I thought of myself as sort of this feral alien, like bringing some sort of enlightenment to society. Arguably, what my body was actually doing was just dumpster diving and contributing nothing. And then it gets into some more, I guess, more subjective descriptions there. Hard, yeah. So then you start getting into trickier territory of opinions about the value of what you're doing too. I didn't really have a point there. I just had a lot of words.
Yeah, I'm guessing like your point about fate is kind of interesting, and it's something that fits in with our like just general middle-aged human theme. It's probably mostly an American thing. This I mean, we're all have it drilled into our heads that you must and that you could, if you wanted to, if you had the proper gusto and daring do something fucking amazing that changed the whole world. Everybody has that inside of them, and you have the responsibility to tap into that. It's just statistically not true. Now, our 6.99 out of the 7 billion humans on Earth, like straight up failures. I don't think other cultures by and large have a struggle with that. They're just like, well, I'm a middle manager and that's what I do, and I enjoy the things that I enjoy. It might be a bit of a uniquely American problem. That often pathological self-conceptualization is also, let's not forget the upside. Like this country does produce a lot of people that believe in themselves doing really, really cool shit and going out on a limb, and sometimes it works out, and that's really neat, but maybe at the cost of psychological stress to many others.
There was we were at a state on the beach at a state park a couple of weeks ago camping, and I had I don't know, maybe you've probably had these where I met somebody on the beach, just another dad there with his wife and kids, and we sat down and had where you sometimes just run into somebody who's just very much a kindred spirit, and you kind of can have the best and most open conversations with them because you've never seen them before and you will probably never see them again. So Darren, if you're listening to this podcast by some tweak of the imagination, sup. And where I was talking with him, and what came to me in a flash is that I had, so again, with the period in Australia where I was fire juggling all the time and thinking of myself as a very sort of, I wrote a couple manifestos, I'll put it that way, manifesti, whatever the plural for manifeste, whatever the plural is for manifesto.
Manifesties.
Manifesties. Yeah, that's the one. And I still believe in what I put down there, but what had the intention of sort of spreading my personal philosophy far and wide at that point, right? And even when I got back attempting to do so, like of course, I'd sunk my whole psyche into this idea that I had some guru like offering to make, right? Of course, I was going to actually make it, and it didn't get very far, as you do. I had other priorities. And the way it came to me in a flash when I was talking to Darren was I realized that I'm like deep in my core that I'm never going to be a celebrity. It's just not going to happen. There is, I mean, of course, the twists of fate, who knows? But as far as for an immediate day to day living with myself, I cannot put any kind of self worth qualifier on whether or not my opinions and awareness reach the masses. Ironically, since we're putting this in a podcast right now,
you're just this is us scratching a neurotic itch, and I think everybody knows that.
Yeah, exactly. But just that realization that I'm never going to be a celebrity. It's not going to happen. So with that, and having intended to have been a visual artist from a very young age and having seriously pursued that, and like that you have to have a certain level of celebrity to make it as a visual artist. Really, you do.
Yeah, sure.
I realized that was a lot of what my ego is having to wrestle with, that like, do I do these things like where do you separate out from what you enjoyed versus what you're doing to accomplish your self-image goals?
Yeah.
And do you even enjoy your self-image goals? Do you even want them?
Yeah, there's a principle in, I'm sorry if you know a lot about Eastern religions and I just bastardize these ideas, but I believe it's Taoism, where there's this idea of doing an action without really thinking or caring on the consequences of that action, and that is your most pure expression of self, of the core of what's in you. I think that's probably about right. Um, you know, everything else in nature, an apple tree is not like, fuck yeah, I'm making apples and people are going to enjoy them, blah, blah, blah. It just does the thing that it does. And as we strip away more layers of our conceptual self and thinking about what the outcome of our various actions are, and caring about feedback loops and things like that, what's left is, I think, if you're going to call anything an authentic self, that's what's left. That's at the core of those layers. And the key is to do it hard, to peel away those layers like hard enough and early enough in life where you're just not completely entrenched and ensconced in this calcified ball that restricts your ability to be creative and move by all of the layers of things that you put upon yourself. Imagine somebody that did go to dental school just because their mommy and daddy thought that would be the thing to do, even though they didn't enjoy it. And then they married what was the right woman, but somebody they're not truly in love with. And now, like, fuck me, if you have this realization, you're in a house with this it's like you would have to just put a nuclear bomb on your life and cause all kinds of suffering to other people if you were going to correct those original sins. I would say, YOLO, fuck it, one life to live, blow that shit up. If you do find yourself later in life just completely unhappy with everything, that has what served me very well is staying as far as possible away from things that put me in that kind of box forever. And then those times when I was unhappy, like when I was just like slinging mortgages for a living and, living in downtown Sacramento, and I wasn't particularly happy with what I was doing for a living, and I just fucking do something else. Like, that's kind of my advice that I have for people. Just, you're not going to know, you're not going to be able to carefully construct your super pretty life raft and get out of the shitstorm that you've put yourself in. Just leave, just sail out of that situation, and you will find your happiness like somewhere on the other side of that horizon, or you won't, but again, like,
at least you'll find out if maybe you want to go back to what you were doing.
Yeah.
At least you know.
yeah, at least I'm um I'm thinking of a conceptual self that I had to strip myself of, which was when I was very religious and active in the church. Like I had people, prophesying over me, like, oh, you're going to do such great things for God. And even my great great grandmother, who was still alive for quite a while in my youth, who got to be like 99 years old, I just feel like Ryan's going to do something really special for Jesus. And so I had this idea of like, I am here to be like a reformer. And I made steps in that direction. I think if I had stayed religious, I may have at least tried to get the American evangelical, you know, strip mall church to be a little less hypocritical and do more good things for people in the world. Um, but I had to, I guess that was part of the psychic pain of coming out of that. Like sometimes your game that you're playing and your conceptual self is just based on a shit ton of fucking nonsense. And unless you just want to keep lying to yourself and perpetuating that lie, like you need to just be okay with letting it all go and maybe being a nobody, right? Is I don't know. That was never valuable to me, I guess, is to be a somebody under false pretenses.
Yeah, I think that's easily a trap that you could fall into. It's one of the things, honestly, it's that I'm very most grateful for in my life is that I didn't really achieve any kind of measurable success at being a cult leader, for example, because that would have been, a really all encompassing sort
Man,
of way to live. There's no way out of that.
if we get to take a trip in the multiverse, I want to go to that timeline. That's
Oh, I'd hang
that's
out. Dude, I'd definitely hang out with me as a cult leader. It'd be a good time.
that's a great fucking timeline. At the risk of bringing it into like the contemporary, political world too much, as I was washing my car, I was listening to a podcast that was about basically like what the fuck happened to Rudy Giuliani. And
Yeah, geez.
yeah, so one of this guy was an expert on Rudy Giuliani. Weird thing to be an expert in, but his biographer was basically like, well, so he had a bit of a fall from grace after he had a failed presidential run and a really bad relationship with his wife and lost a lot of his reputation just by being kind of a failed drunk. And then got on the Trump train. And part of the reason he got in Donald Trump's ear after he lost the election and tried to say, no, you didn't lose the election. You really did. And just became a complete fucking crazy person is all of his worth and success and self concept of a successful individual relied on Trump at that point. Right. And so he had to perpetuate the nonsense in order to just try and hold on to something of what he valued about his own self concept and about other people's like opinion of him. So he was sometimes it makes us into fucking crazy people. Like if what you need to perpetuate the lie of your own, the grandeur of your own self concept is just lies. You will fully embrace those lies more often than not, and I think more useful to possibly the listeners of this podcast and to ourselves, it happens in much smaller and more insidious ways all of the time, most likely.
I mean, yeah, one thing that I've taken as a given for many years is that I'm definitely telling lies to myself about myself like all the time. I don't know what they are. I will never root them all out. I'm sure the best I can hope for is that the people around will tell me and I will listen if I am acting on particularly dangerous illusions about myself. Like that's really the best you can hope for. Like your self-image is not you.
Yeah.
I guess that's really the core of this episode is I think it's absolutely critical to really know at your core that your self-image is not you.
Yeah. And because of that, one of the most useful things I've ever read was like you don't have to kill your false self because it's not you, which is really the whole point, right? Like if you I feel like some people, like we're all running around in a costume, a conceptual costume, and some people go deep on the spiritual practice of just trying to destroy the costume and never wear a costume. I'm just like, fuck it, it's a costume. Like, just be emotionally detached from it so you can take it off if you need to, or put it back on if you need to, or modify it if you need to. Like, it's just
being able to modify it when desired is probably really the life skill there.
Yeah, like it's just a tool. And some things are inherent to you. You're not going to modify it. I'm not going to become a successful basketball player or whatever. But that is where having other people, so this was a big thing in that book, Strangers to Ourselves, having other people in your life that are valuable can help you, is into the self-deception thing. So over and over again, they find when they do studies, and a really good one that I remember was they would show you a picture of two women, and they would say, or men if you were a woman, or whatever your sexual preference is. They would show you a picture of two people,
sexy,
and you would say, I find that person more attractive, and they'd go, okay, and they'd come back a month later and they'd show you the person you didn't pick, and they would say, this is the person you picked. Why did you pick that person? And overwhelmingly, people come up with a reason. They say, oh, well, she's wearing earrings, and I like girls that wear earrings, or whatever. And through all different kinds of permutations, they've found, like, when split brain studies where your corpus callosum gets cut and your left and right brain can't talk to each other, the left brain will make up reasons for what the right brain is doing to explain its behavior. So one of the things that we're doing when we're like, your brain is an engine of building your conceptual self, and one of the ways it does it is it comes up with a rational reason for everything you do, even if you are completely disconnected from what those rational reasons are. And picking a spouse or partner is probably key to that. You probably just smelled some fucking pheromones, and there's some part of your brain that was like, these DNAs will be good DNAs. You love her because of her humor or whatever, right? We make this thing up because I guess if you didn't have that, in a sense, like, it's a crazy neurotic thing to do, but if you didn't have it, you would be a bit of a crazy person. And so on partners, they also found that consistently spouses are more reliable when they're asking questions about, what is your spouse likely to do in such and such a situation, or they
more
they
reliable
are more
than
correct
the person,
because they don't have your conceptual self built in, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're only looking at your behavior. And so one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that we can do to be less crazy in this realm is try and just look at your behavior as if you were something that you were studying. Like,
yeah. And that's what got me on this track, is looking at my behavior and being like, hey, that doesn't really match up with what I think about myself.
Yeah, correct. I think for me, like, I have a life partner now because I had a self-conceptualization of, like, the Sigma male that didn't need anybody. But the fact is, when I'm by myself, I'm kind of bored and lonely, and I like to share things with people. It's a really, really strong thing that I have in me. And if I looked at my behavior, like, when every time I break up with somebody, I go on some excursion by myself, and I really enjoy it. And those are very, very valuable experiences. And I want to keep those kinds of things going in my life. But I'm always just like, oh, I want someone to share this with, to, like, tend the garden with me, or that I can make a meal for, or whatever it is. And I looked at that behavior and went, like, look, this is something you consistently do. You need to find a way to balance these parts of yourself and get fulfillment, like the lone wolf that wants to walk into the woods and the person that wants to sit and have a cozy meal with their partner in the evenings. Like, you need to find a way to balance these two things out, or you're going to be one type of crazy person, one way or the other. So that came from observing, like, no, what do I actually do consistently? Okay, that apparently that's a thing that I need. Apparently that's the actual sort of person that I am, regardless of what my idealized self by reading fucking Thoreau happens to be.
Okay, you ready? I'm ready to take it to a third dimension. Are you ready for this? We haven't talked about this dimension before.
The third dimension. Anyone who's watching this on YouTube, look at your screen and cross your eyes slightly and enjoy the third dimension.
Let me get my head a little smaller so we'll be one person.
The video is us next to each other, so if you made it small enough, you could cross your eyes if we were both centered about the same place and come up with, like, a hybrid.
That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do it.
Situation.
Yes. All right, it's over.
All right. If
All
you're
right,
not
here we go. You ready?
confused or
for this?
horrified yet, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, you're about. If you're not yet, you're about to be. Okay, so now I'm going to add the transcendental dimension. Here we go. So I know we both loved the transcendental dimension, so I'm going to go there. So
I'm actually going on a vacation there this weekend.
Awesome. Dollywood.
Dollywood. I'm literally going to Dollywood this weekend, and
that's the transcendental dimension right there.
A bit of a yeah, sure. Why not?
It is.
Fuck it.
It's delightful. It's Dolly's transcendent.
Yeah.
So okay. So something like it was just before I had kids, so I would have been like 20, either just turned 25 or just about to turn 25, right? I went on a 10-day meditation retreat with Vipassana meditation. I don't know if you've heard of Vipassana meditation. Presumably it's what the Buddha himself practiced when he was.
Is Vipassana what's been colloquially referred to as mindfulness meditation?
No,
something different. Okay,
something different. Okay. It's in many ways it's the core of it, but Vipassana is very specific.
Okay.
What you do with Vipassana is you sit and you don't move, and you, like, piece by piece, like toe to toe, scan your body. Like you put all your attention on one part of your body at a time, and you observe the physical sensation in that part of your body, and then you move on to the next one, and you just scan your body, right? Up and down, up and down, up and down. Crown of the head to the tips of the toes, up and down.
I'm focusing on the taint now. My taint feels maybe a little more moist than I would like.
A little moist. But you observe that moistness, right? And you don't judge it. You don't you try not to comment on it. You try not to even verbalize it mentally. You're feeling the moisture.
I'm feeling a little. You're not even going to I was going to say swampy, but you're not. That would be a layer of conceptualization.
Moist.
No, just straight physical sensation.
Warm, cold, moist, dry, painful, not painful. And I mean, when I did this retreat, which if anybody who's listening is intrigued, it's dhamma.org, DHAMMA.org. And they have centers all over the world, and it's free. Like they put you up and they feed you for 10 days.
Wow.
And so you take a vow of silence. You don't speak a word for those 10 days, and you meditate for 13 hours a day. And then they tell you to try to do it instead of sleeping if you can, but you're probably going to pass out, but try to do it instead of sleeping.
Huh.
And the intention there, the theory behind this, and a lot of what the Buddha was espousing, is that your actions are largely driven by your response to your physical feelings. Like you feel warm in your left buttock, so you shout at your spouse, and you don't really know why or have any control over why, which kind of goes back to what you were saying about the whole left brain, right brain thing. All these physical sensations are producing emotional reactions, which are then justified by intellectual explanations. But really, it's the physical sensations that are driving all your actions.
Super true. If you haven't noticed that in yourself, try to observe it, and I've just found that to be a life-changing revelation. I was being like, there are times which I'm super nice to my girlfriend, and sometimes which I'm being dickish, and then if I'm being a little like more snippy than I would like myself to be, I can notice, like, if I just sit down and go, oh yeah, there's some maybe some heartburn or something going on in my chest, or my blood sugar's low, or whatever it is, right? Yeah, that is incredibly valuable to notice about yourself. Yeah.
And you might even justify it with like, oh, I was tired. But then Vipassana demands that you take that a little further. What do you mean by you were tired? Oh, you had kind of a tingling feeling behind your eyelids, and maybe a little bit of a headache. Like, really drill it down. And then with that full body scan, you're at any period, you're really trying to feel all the sensations in your body. Anyway, so quite the week. I haven't. So here I took this. It was an incredible experience. Kept up the meditation for a while. Probably they recommend an hour every day. I don't do that. I probably should pick that practice back up because it was really beneficial. But and here's where I'm going with this too. So I haven't really practiced that meditation in 8 years. I still do it. I definitely remember it, and I remember the skills of it, and will regularly check in with like my sensations using the techniques I learned during that. But I don't sit Vipassana regularly, just occasionally. Um, that does not change my conception of myself as a meditative person, and nothing that we've talked about here today changes that, because I am aware of the core of my existence that feels nothing and is not in a body.
What do you mean by your meditative self?
I think of myself as a meditative person, even though I don't sit very often, because I use that to check in with myself. And even I can even be in the middle, I'll even be in the middle of a conversation, like for now while I'm thinking about it, and be observing my own actions from that meditative center. Of course, I would never pretend that I'm doing it, on the level of like the Buddha or whatever, but I am doing it, that I can drop back into that meditative center and observe myself as an outsider.
Yeah. So you're saying that there's a almost what do I want to say? Like uh that's like a self mode or conceptualization that is almost without very many conceptual layers, like that is almost unalterable, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The that heart drop, the one that only observes, that it sees what's going on, doesn't control what's going on, is only observing what's going on. And there's my third transcendental dimension that I'm adding. Are you your self-image? Are you your actions? Or are you the observer, which observes both?
Yeah, and maybe it's it's hard for me to think of doing any of the positive steps that we talked about without having that base understanding of what you are to drop back to. Like that's almost once you really, really, really like center yourself in the position of the observer, which is this unmovable, inalterable thing. Um, and see everything else as secondary and transient, that really frees you up to let go of the costume, alter the costume, whatever. Like if the conceptual self is all you have, well, then getting rid of it is going to feel like you're dying, and you're going to, or altering it is going to feel like chopping off a limb if you're too deeply identified with it. And you're going to have panic responses, right? You're going to have um, everything that's built into you as a creature to preserve your own life and existence is going to go into defending your conceptual self in really neurotic and destructive ways sometimes.
And
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. So even just like this is a regular experience that I've had, right? So talking about sort of the transcendental self and the infinite observer and et cetera, I can already like there's a sense of an emotional sense and a physical sense of awe, right? That starts to build up, even just having this conversation. I don't know if you're experiencing similar physical sensations as I do, talking about like your deep physical center. But for me, it's like I feel it in the throat. I feel it traveling up the back of the spine, right? Sort of this sense of like reverence and awe, and it's a very pleasurable sensation discussing this myself as a spiritual being, right? That's not the observer. That's still just a physical response. The observer isn't that. It's centered. It has no emotions. It has no feeling. It just observes. And even what's from then kind of jumping around just from an evolutionary standpoint, that's fucking fascinating to me. Just absolutely blows my mind that there is a physical pleasure response that comes from thinking of yourself as something beyond a biological organism. Like, what the fuck?
I don't know.
How does that even work? Why?
I could speculate on it, but anything I'd say would almost certainly be wrong. That isn't. Yeah, yeah. That's
Comes
where
back to the. Go ahead.
a lot of it's where that's where you're for me, that's where a lot of just like we are only monkeys, like kind of evolutionary psychology starts to break down, is when you have the just senses of like awe and wonder at things like that, and those pleasurable sensations, and how none of that really maps onto anything I can think of as like merely a behavior to perpetuate the genes of the organism. Like it seems like there's
Not very
something else
Darwin
that's
of you.
going on there. Yeah, yeah, that seems trans Darwin.
Not very Darwin of you at all.
I mean, I'm not trying to be that
And
man.
I think that that builds back into the fate aspect of it too, where they're to a certain extent they'll, and you know, then I mean this might be going further afield, but then you start getting into that question of free will too. Like, do you actually have any? Um, are you in fact just an observing response, following this meat sack around that and watching it do whatever it was going to do anyway?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on the deepest level of truth, like it, I'm a like I guess you would call me a non-dualist. I don't I guess. I mean, the only reason I feel uncomfortable saying is like I assigning an identity to it. But I think you are both observer and observed. Like that is
Mm-hmm.
seeing yourself as just observer. That gets into this key of like, okay, what I am at my center is consciousness. And people that spend a lot of time there say that there's an extremely deep peace in it because you are that thing no matter whether or not you're experiencing pain or loss or joy or whatever it is. Like there's this immovable center to your existence that is transcendent of all of those things, right? And if the idea of a soul is worth a shit in any concept, that's it. You know, eternal life always talks about like in the monotheistic sense, like the perpetual, like the continual perpetuation of the ego. And it's like, well, the bad news is no, none of that comes along for the ride. And if you've observed yourself closely, most of your ego that you know cobbled together when you were a young person has already died and fallen away, so it doesn't exist anymore. And if we were elves and lived to 1,000 years, you would be unrecognizable to yourself again 400 years from now or something, right? But the good news is there's something there that is that has no features and is unchanging and is unmoved by all of these things. Then you get into, well, what is the observer observing? Like consciousness is what consciousness is aware of, and you are either none of those things or all of those things. You can conceive of it in the same way. I think I'm getting like too far in the weeds there, but yeah, you are. I I don't think you're just. I get away from this the existential dread sensation of just being along for the ride, because if you think of yourself as just an observer, I almost picture somebody who's in Plato's cave looking at the screen and you are strapped to your seat. Fuck you. You're watching the movie that's going to play and you didn't even get to pick what it was, right? Whereas if you are the totality of all things, right? You're both the observer and the observed. You are the thing that stuff is happening to, and you are the doer of those things all at the same time.
I
That's
remember when at the when you and I when you were we were slinging mortgages. I remember you had a really good metaphor for that, as far as getting yourself through the day. It was like thought of yourself as a rat in a maze, and you're looking around and just looking at the walls in terror and going, what did I do to be stuck here? What is even happening? But then if once you realize that what's actually happened is that you put yourself in the maze to see what it was like, then that was a very sort of different way of getting through your 100 years or whatever.
yeah. I think on the deepest level, that's the case. Like you, and this even doesn't fully make sense to me because I think it's inconceivable within the monkey body. But I think when you get down to it, like you wanted to be here, right? Like I do not think I don't think it's entire well, in a certain sense, nothing like God didn't you could say, did God choose to make himself, or did he just show up? Like any being that is conscious, like is just showed up one day to whatever it is. But if there's anything called agency, like you wanted, I hope, maybe it's just me, I wonder if other people can feel it, but if I really think about it, I kind of feel it in my soul that I wanted to be here now to do this thing for the pleasure and intrigue of it, and that I wasn't just I uh who said that, I a stranger in afraid in a world I never made. And I think that's how a lot of people feel. It's how I felt for a very, very long time. And I felt it was horrible. It was a horrible, crushing sensation to feel like I was put in this world and against my own will, and had no choice, and also wasn't given a map or an instruction set. Like I think that's a very normal way to feel, but at the deepest level, you like kind of chose to come to the party, and like, is if you just understand that and understand that you're wearing a costume, then it's kind of chill. No.
And sort of circling it back, I wonder how much the whole self-image thing is, and putting motivations on why you do or did do what you do is kind of just putting a coat and a jacket on that very existential dread. Like, oh, I don't have to think about why it is that I'm not going after the things that I'm told to, or why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing with my day, or why I'm even alive at all. I'm gonna come up with reasons, because that's way easier than putting those reasons down for a second and asking, no, really, why? What am I doing here?
It's certainly way easier than admitting I have no fucking idea, right? And that's, I mean, that describes all of my adolescent, existential angst. Was it felt like I was the only one to be like, hey, do any of us have any fucking idea what's going on? Like, why are we just proceeding with civilization as prescribed to us without like assessing the basic foundations of like the value of our actions and motivations and truth and anything? And you know that's valid, man. And I think that if we were a healthy, enlightened people, we would get adolescence through that stage in a healthy way. But you're like, if you're a person that is not willing to just assume an identity and a game and a set of rules without doing the work it would take to find out whether or not that's based on anything true or valuable at all, like, you're fucked. Like, you're on your own. Like, welcome. Like, there's a few people like Hoger and I are sitting here talking about it. There's some books I can recommend you, but you're not getting any help from society at large.
No, no, not really at all. And then like the organized religion, like I have a chip on my shoulder for sure towards organized religion. And I feel like organized religion largely capitalizes on that it sees people who are like, what is going on here? Which really at your core is probably everybody.
Oh, it's
And they say,
perfect.
well, it's in the Bible. And then you read the Bible and you're like, this is really confusing. What the fuck does it mean? And somebody says, well, it means X, Y, and Z. And you go, oh, that's good. This person is wise. I'm going, and they must understand what this book means because they said that they do. So they must know what it means. And now I don't have to think about this anymore.
It's the God book. How do we know it's the God book? Well, it says right there in the book, it's the God
That's
book.
right there, dude.
Which actually the Bible doesn't even say about itself. The Quran and the Book of Mormon do, but not the Bible. No, I mean, look at I'm in the South now, and in the South we have lots and lots of religious billboards. And almost all of them were like, do you know where you're going when you die? Call this phone number. And it's like they're preying on exactly that. If somebody be driving by and being like, I don't know. Do you have an answer? And pick up their phone. You're going to hell. Except we have an answer. We have an answer for that. Like, okay, I guess in the absence, you will tell yourself some bullshit in the absence of an actual truthful, reasonable answer. That's like why we invented science, to just try to, at great pains, skirt around that human instinct.
And I definitely think that you can find valid answers for the nature of existence in the Bible, but you got to go looking for them. Someone else isn't just going to go tell you what they are.
That's a whole other thing. Sure, there might be some things in the Bible that are useful to you, but there's other shit like, I don't know, any other literature or poetry. I don't know. A lot of stuff fiction. Jesus said was pretty cool. If that does something for you, great. It doesn't have to do with the truth pursuit, I necessarily think, but it has to do with like being a decent fucking human. Like the Bible was not written to somebody having an existential crisis. It was very much meant to
book of rules,
beat you over the head and say, just believe the thing because you're being told to believe the thing. So yeah. And what I believe in is love and goodness and all the things that Dolly Parton believes in. So I'm going to have
a transcendental weekend.
I'm going to have to run and go to the transcendental mystical paradise that is Dollywood. If you don't know what Dollywood is, there's a fucking Dolly Parton theme park in Tennessee. If you want to go, come to my house. I will take you there. I have guest passes. It's amazing.
All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good episode. We'll end it abruptly with a reference to you going to Dollywood.
Oh yeah, you're going to put your own judgments and self-conceptualizations on top of whether or not you think you did a good episode. You're not just going to let yourself do the thing and then send it out into the world without judgment.
Yes.
We've learned nothing.
What else am I going to do? Let other people make that decision? Fuck that.
Rate us on iTunes. Like and subscribe.
Smash that like and subscribe.
Actually, button. We are way too enlightened to like fucking care if like you like or subscribe to our thing. So like give us 1 star on iTunes. Like it doesn't matter because like your judgments are just like made up in your own head and they don't have anything to do with like reality. And you're just showing what a fucking ignorant person you are.
I don't know about you all, but I'm old enough to remember when hipster wasn't an insult.
That was always an insult to me. No,
they were just hipsters. I was in San Francisco right before it turned into a pejorative, and they were just hipsters. It was just an aesthetic.
All right, you fucking hipster. Well, I'm gonna go to ironically visit a theme park and wear my squirrel shirt. So
you're a lot more of a hipster than I am.
Fuck. That hurts in my soul. My self-concept is wounded.
You can ask Allison, she'll confirm it.
She will. All right, just so I don't have to deal with feelings anymore. So long, everybody.
Signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Ryangle Podcast. Our music is by Tallac, Tallac. For more by Tallac, visit soundcloud.com/Tallac.